Welcome to the chaos sector. Hope you all are enjoying the simulations, but we have to briefly come back to the current news on the case. I have a question. What could Bethany Funk possibly know that would benefit Kohberger? His defense has subpoenaed her to testify. That's interesting, don't you think? If anything, it suggests that Funk was not asleep, right? Did she see someone else? Did she hear someone else, like multiple people inside the home? Did she observe anything that would exonerate Kohberger of all charges against him? Well, the defense believes her testimony is key to that exoneration. Furthermore, if her testimony would exonerate Kohberger, then this means it would also contradict or expose Dylan's accounts as well. And the avalanche just wipes away everything claimed prior, such as his DNA found on a knife sheath, Kohberger stalking Kaylee Gonzalez, Kohberger attempting to communicate with her on social media, the so-called digital evidence that was allegedly collected. Something tells me that Bethany's accounts are based on something that contradicts Kohberger even being physically at that home. Which segues us into addressing the surveillance. Recently, there has been a so-called leak of surveillance footage from Linda Lane, which is near the victim's home. It does display a white vehicle pulling into the parking lot around 4:05 a.m. Now, this would seem to be devastating evidence against Kohberger, right? Not so fast, because there are a few problems with this recent leak. Also, Kohberger's alibi was that he simply drove around at night, and everyone assumes this is admission of guilt, in a subtle way. Not so fast, again. Do you honestly think someone who claims the DNA found in the home is not his, nor is the vehicle spotted in surveillance not his, and Bethany Funk being called to testify, would rely on that reason as his alibi? It was simply a sarcastic jab at the prosecution, who has actually violated a few court proceedings. But let's address the surveillance, because this is what everyone is focusing on at this point. Why didn't Moscow PD reveal any surveillance of Kohberger near that home? They don't have any surveillance of Kohberger's vehicle, that's why. Remember, they had the surveillance before Kohberger was even a person of interest. I repeat, they obtained surveillance from some neighborhood camera, before, that's right, before Kohberger was even thought of. The media presented surveillance from a gas station, showing a white vehicle speeding down the road. But this couldn't have been the only surveillance at the time, because this is not near the crime scene. What does this mean? This means the authorities obtained surveillance from somewhere near the crime scene, and somehow chose to keep this from the public? The gas station surveillance was, quote, released to the public, yet no actual surveillance footage from the actual area near the crime scene? If a potential suspect has fled the scene of the murder, and you have surveillance footage showing that vehicle physically near that home, your duty as a police department is to alert the public about this potential suspect, as they would be assumed to have stabbed for people to death. Once again, Kohberger was not the suspect at that point, it was an unidentified killer. Moscow PD was supposed to provide the residents of Moscow, and throughout Idaho, with that surveillance footage near the home, to alert them of the potential danger. In all other crimes, such as homicides, which are caught on camera, the surveillance footage is released to the media, for public awareness. And some of those crimes are literally showing everything happening. Those police departments released that surveillance, yet a vehicle spotted in surveillance assumed to be a killer of college students, is not released? Not even to the local news station of Moscow? Would your local police department do this? Surely not. And of course, that surveillance would cycle through mainstream media. Yet, we only viewed a grainy screenshot of a white vehicle miles away from the scene of the crime. But let's decipher the terminology used, early on in the case, which indicated someone had pointed the finger at Kohberger, instead of the guilt pulling him back into Moscow. Quote, Moscow Police Chief James Fry said in a video statement Friday, "We have looked at massive amounts of video footage, especially in the critical camera areas. We've looked at the 24 hours prior to and the 24 hours after, and now we're extending that out even further, to other cameras and other time frames. We have massive amounts of people looking at this, multiple different groups just looking at the different videos at different locations, because we have investigators all across the nation that are reviewing these videos for us, and sending us back information," the chief said. Unquote. Once again, the terms used are very distinct. Massive amounts of video footage, massive amounts of people looking at this is a very elaborate manner in which is explaining how the investigation is going. For a department that was still putting pieces together, having massive amounts of video footage, near the critical camera areas, you would think they would have the suspect dead to rights, right? Remember, he stated in the critical camera areas. That would be near the home, which we'll address in a moment. But let's continue with the article. Quote, Lanier said Monday that police do have a lot of information in the case that they are choosing not to release to the public. We're not releasing specific details because we do not want to compromise this investigation, he said in a video statement. Kaylee's dad, Steve Gonzalez, urges anyone in Moscow with a surveillance system to come forward. He said he's worried some of those key videos could be erased now that a month has passed. Unquote. Now, this is where we'll stop and address the surveillance. The critical camera areas is the surveillance footage from Linda Lane. It's obvious that is the surveillance they have. Yet, this surveillance footage was not publicly released, similar to the surveillance from the gas station. What's the point, you ask? Before Koberger was taken in, Moscow PD had informed the public about a white Hyundai Elantra, right? Yet, they didn't release any surveillance of that vehicle from the very surveillance of Linda Lane. Mind you, the landlord of that apartment complex had handed over that surveillance. Not sure when this occurred, but the point is it was examined by the department. We can assume this was weeks after the murders. They claim the murders occurred around 3 a.m. initially, then changed it to 4 a.m. The vehicle is spotted in that Linda Lane surveillance, around 4 a.m. This would be examined before, once again, before Koberger was the suspect. Pay close attention. They didn't release that surveillance to the news, rather, the gas station surveillance was released, which is timed at 3:45 a.m. Now the problem with that surveillance is the physical footage hasn't been released. Instead, a screenshot of the surveillance was the only lead the public observed. I know many people have their opinions, but here at the Chaos Sector, it appears that screenshot has been edited. It almost looks like a holographic image. Let's examine it once more. There are a few problems with the screenshot that indicate it is not authentic. First off, the upper left-hand corner has the camera, which is on the backside of the cell phone. One of our audience members suggested that somehow that was the reflection of the computer, shown on the backside of the cell phone, that's why it looked so odd. No offense, but that makes no sense. As you see, the right-hand corner displays the person's fingers, which indicate obviously they are holding the cell phone from the backside, along with the camera to the upper left-hand corner. Yet, the body of the cell phone has a screen displayed on the backside, which is impossible. And if you look closely, you can see the surveillance footage of the vehicle, the road, and everything depicted as the surveillance, bleeding outside of the cell phone's physical shape. Meaning, the road in surveillance, such as the dividing lane marks, bleed outside of the actual cell phone. No matter how distorted a video would be, it won't bleed outside of the physical device that has captured it via a screenshot. Think of an image, or a body of text, that has margins. In editing, bleeding refers to content extending outside of the margin points. Now apply this to a physical device, such as a cell phone, that took a screenshot of the surveillance on the gas station's computer. No matter what the individual did, such as moved their cell phone to adjust the angle, the physical surveillance footage being captured would not bleed outside of, wait, why am I even explaining it this way? The image is on the backside of the cell phone. How is the camera of the cell phone blocking the surveillance footage? It's literally blocking the front window of the vehicle. This is impossible. Why is there a red hue in the front of the vehicle? It looks like someone went into a photo editing program and clone-stamped various parts of the vehicle to, quote, smoothen the image out. It's not just the blur effect of motion in video footage. If you look at the front door's window trim, it looks like it's been erased, or better yet, there is a dark hue that's covering that portion of the vehicle. Even the road is edited. Examine the divider line along the road. If you observe the line from the right-hand side and follow the left-hand side, you see that the dividing line is crooked. We have keen eyes, my friends, yet this doesn't take much to spot. There is a dip in the road, adjacent to the rear of the vehicle. Now this would be White Avenue, which intersects with Troy Road, near the mobile gas station, that spotted the vehicle. As you see, the road curves, and even the dividing lines are a bit off, but there's even more evidence of Photoshop. The yellow dividers are not visible in that surveillance, only the white divider, which is to the right-hand side of the road. But then there's more. If you examine to the bottom of the image, you see what would be the pedestrian area along the road. Yet how is that visible, without the yellow dividers being visible as well? The wider the angle, which captures the edge of the sidewalk, would have to expand the view of the entire road, which the yellow dividers would be visible as well. Oh my freaking days, this is without a doubt photoshopped. Yet, all media outlets have displayed this very image, and didn't think anything was off with it? This is clearly not authentic surveillance. No need to do this to surveillance of a potential suspect spotted speeding down the road, right? And look at the fingers to the right-hand side. The finger on the top is literally transparent. You can see the surveillance footage through the finger, which is impossible with a physical object, such as a freaking finger. The bottom finger is behind, yes, behind the surveillance footage, yet not behind the physical cell phone, as it is depicted as holding it. The blotchy or fuzzy area near the bottom finger, which is depicted as the road, appears to have been edited into the imagery. That's why there is a white smudgy appearance along the bottom half. It was clone stamped into the imagery, then brushed up to make it appear as one screenshot image. This is unbelievable. I find it strange that nobody in the true crime community ever pointed this out. Clearly this is photoshopped. But everyone can come out and attempt to debunk theories? What about debunking the very vehicle that was reported as the killer's vehicle by the mainstream media? That's the initial point of the case, the hunt for that very vehicle by Moscow PD. Do you understand? Now what does this mean? It means that surveillance footage is obviously fake. There's no other explanation for the visual errors. And if that surveillance footage is fake, despite a real vehicle being shown, it brings into question if the vehicle spotted was used to track someone specifically from the start. It all makes sense now. The reason Moscow PD didn't release the actual surveillance from that gas station is because it's not a Hyundai Elantra. They literally transformed the white vehicle into a white Hyundai Elantra. Or, maybe that white Hyundai Elantra had a sunroof, and we've discovered Koberger didn't have a sunroof. So they block out the front portion of the vehicle, which would display the sunroof. Of course, the search for a white Hyundai Elantra with a sunroof begins. I believe the reason the divider lines are crooked, and the road dips in a bit, is because they patched two different roads together. Perhaps the vehicle was spotted on another road, and merged that surveillance with the surveillance on White Avenue. Which would mean, there wasn't a white vehicle spotted by the gas station surveillance at 3:45 a.m. Do you see this madness? Moscow PD obtained that surveillance, my friends, and clearly there wasn't a white vehicle spotted on White Avenue at 3:45 a.m. Or, it could have been spotted earlier, which would completely destroy the time frame they claim Koberger was present in the neighborhood. All of the visual noise was used to distract the public's focus away from the editing. The camera is visually distracting, the fingers are visually distracting, and of course everyone will observe the white vehicle in the screenshot as real surveillance. But when you examine the screenshot, and not just accept it as authentic surveillance, you see all of the editing. This isn't the first time we had to examine surveillance and spot editing. Anyone remember the Kenneka Jenkins case? Of course. We only deal with logic. Don't you find it strange that recently Linda Lane surveillance has been leaked, yet in all this time, we haven't seen actual real-time surveillance from that gas station? Surely by now, it should have been released, right? You've already provided the public with a so-called screenshot of the surveillance, why not the actual footage? Because it would not be Koberger's vehicle, and the public would detect the difference. We mentioned this briefly, about there being a connection between Washington State University and the University of Idaho. Soon after this so-called surveillance was released, with the description being a white Hyundai Elantra, Koberger's vehicle was spotted by none other than Washington State University campus police. This was reported on November 29, if I'm not mistaken. Have to go back and check the official date that so-called surveillance was released. I'll backtrack, can't remember at this point. Anyone knows off the top of their head, feel free to share. Tying this to the recent surveillance that was leaked on Linda Lane. I find that surveillance being leaked very odd, don't you think? It was around some time prior, but it's only recently that people are really talking about it. And surely the mainstream media would have been all over that surveillance. Koberger's defense team summons Bethany Funk to testify, and all of a sudden, surveillance on Linda Lane is so-called leaked out. A white vehicle spotted at 4:05 a.m. does not prove it was Koberger's vehicle. Especially when we factor in, Moscow PD gave different time frames of the death. And also, an unmarked cruiser, which was also white, with a similar body type, was spotted in the body cam footage. Perhaps, someone with a badge was involved. There were secrets that needed to be kept secret. And the only way to do this is to prevent someone from speaking. Maybe someone wanted to snitch and decided to leave Moscow, because things started to get a bit dangerous. Maybe someone wanted to continue their friendship with that person, and even decide to leave Moscow as well. Maybe someone just wanted to live their life, and get away from the drama with their family. Maybe someone wanted to marry that person, and provide emotional support. Maybe someone felt it was best to allow everything to happen, as they would be protected from any interrogation. Maybe someone was just caught in the middle, and was not sure of what to do. Maybe, just maybe, someone with a badge felt it was time to shut them up for good. Along with others, who wanted to keep the secrets. The theory that the murders surrounded drugs is one of the more logical theories presented. It explains why multiple students were murdered. We've presented several theories, but we can't know for certain what is true, obviously. But we always break our theories down to our audience, to come to the most logical conclusion. Kim, the mother of the WSU student, stated it basically was a shakedown, involving drugs. A student also mentioned that it was a party house, where drugs and alcohol were common. Someone alleged that the murders were the result of those housemates dumping $250,000 worth of drugs, which we assume were to be sold in the college circle. That would indicate that the housemates decided not to participate in the distribution of those drugs anymore, and were murdered due to it. That's not chump change to a drug dealer, my friends. That type of money can in fact have someone murdered. Heck, someone can be murdered for less than that. $250,000 to a drug dealer is a devastating loss of a profit, and also the fact that those housemates would potentially snitch. They would have to be silenced, for good. And when you add a few bad apples in the police department, with others being complicit with the drug trafficking ring, you have a recipe for disaster in that community. And then there's more, the oath of silence that fraternities and sororities take when they pledge allegiance. Before and after the murders, nobody will come out and say anything. They would know it was gonna happen, they would know who was involved, they would know when, where, how, and why it happened. Their oath of silence is to protect the so-called extended family they have joined in college. But let's keep your brain balanced. You may say, this is all logical, but Koberger has a white Hyundai Elantra, it was spotted in the gas station surveillance, and recently a white vehicle was spotted in the Linda Lane surveillance, at the time that matches the timestamp of his path. How do you explain that? By investigating, that's how. The white vehicle at 4:05 a.m. We go all the way back to the irrational element of Koberger attempting to accomplish those murders. One man, with one knife, arrives at a home, in a college town, on a Saturday night, with 5 cars parked at the target's home, and not knowing if there are additional people inside, translates to, I'm gonna just catch this young lady somewhere alone, no way I can accomplish this tonight. And proceeds to drive back to Pullman. Also, there is no evidence that he even stalked one of those housemates. It has been reported as fact without any evidence. Remember the Dateline NBC report about Koberger breaking into a friend's home? A so-called source informed Dateline that Koberger broke into a co-worker's home, pretended to advise her to install security cameras, and he was later identified as the culprit? Now, how could he be identified as the culprit without any arrest of the crime? Who identified him? It would have to be authorities involved, right? No prior arrest, yet it was claimed by the mainstream media. If you are fabricating crimes of the past, which is literally slandering his name publicly, then it's likely you would fabricate crimes in the future. If you recall, Koberger had asked if there was anyone else arrested. Initially, many thought that this meant he was involved in the murders. But I see this as him wondering why he was arrested, when he resides in another state, when there would have to be many vehicles that match the description in surveillance from Moscow. And this is where we dig a bit. It is evident that Washington State University and the University of Idaho clearly had a drug connection. From the dealers who bring it into the community, to those who distribute it for the dealers. Perhaps Koberger had noticed this drug trafficking on campus, and obviously his glaring eyes caused the students to become aware of his knowledge of the crimes. You have multiple plots happening at the same time. The housemates were involved in drug trafficking, or they allowed the drug trafficking to be based in their home. Some of them felt it became too dangerous, and decided to distance themselves from it. Quote, they're gonna get you for this, Maddie. Maddie, what did you tell Adam? I told Adam everything, unquote. That's the main component, the punishment for that decision. And the ex-boyfriend, who was called that night, said to himself, well, you wanna leave me, then I have no concern. Ignored the calls, didn't come to the house later that morning. Yeah, where's the love, Jack? Wasn't she your sweetheart? It's obvious he was contacted that morning, but he doesn't come to the house. And he was cleared, yet the authorities believe it was a targeted attack. So if it's a targeted attack, then you interrogate everyone who has a connection to those housemates, by way of friendship, associations, or even exes. In another state, Koberger is being watched by students, who feel he may be a thorn in the side of the drug trafficking, which led to more focus on him, including outside of the campus. Long story short, when the murders happened, Koberger was pointed out as the killer, to get him out of the way. Killing two birds with one stone. Take care of the housemates, and take care of the prying eyes of Koberger. They knew he had a white Hyundai Elantra, someone in Moscow also had a white Hyundai Elantra, and simply drove around at night, to frame Koberger. That sounds crazy, but if you're trying to keep the drug trafficking a secret, you will do anything to protect the greenbacks. There is a reason Kim claimed that her daughter was notified by way of other friends, who was notified by someone in the house, that the housemates had been murdered. No call to the authorities, yet would call fellow college students, knowing that would spread like wildfire? This would indicate that they knew nobody, once again, would call the authorities about it. It would just circulate amongst the college circle. Why would someone who attends Washington State be informed about the murders before someone from Moscow? Remember, the young male pondered why she was informed before the inner circle of students who attended the University of Idaho. I have a feeling the news had to be relayed to someone in Washington, because it was linked to framing Koberger. Soon enough, Washington State Campus Police reported his vehicle to authorities, despite all of the white Hyundai Elantras that weren't spotted and reported. It was a frame, involving a scapegoat. Koberger is linked to the murders, by way of his prying eyes. No different than someone spotting criminal activity in a community. They become a target. Heck, to even go a bit further, we can say Koberger did travel to Moscow that night. Because he wanted to see firsthand what was truly going on. Driving around town, observing the communities, trying to figure it all out, putting himself in the position of being an actual police officer. He did apply for that job, right? He was denied the job, perhaps, because of his prying eyes. With corrupt police departments, they don't want prying eyes around. You spot too much, you hear too much, you are a threat to that corrupt operation. He drives to Moscow, knowing it was a Saturday night, so obviously a lot of activity would be going on. Perhaps he even knew about the house on King Road, which was slated, the party house. That's where the drugs may come from, he thinks to himself. Googles the home, and drives to the area. Then, he hears screaming, he hears barking. Clearly it was a dangerous moment. At any moment, perhaps gunshots may go off. He speeds away, heading back to Pullman. But he was spotted in surveillance during the time of the murders. What an unlucky break. This is the chaos sector.